Worktown People by Humphrey Spender. Photographs from Northern England, 1937 to 1938. Actually between August 1937 and April 1938. First published by Falling Wall Press in 1982. It's got around 128 pages and something like 104 photographs. It's a lovely old-fashioned 10.5 by 8, the classic old format, which I absolutely love. Everything seems to be this way up now. So this book should come with a warning. This book is unbelievable. I just adore this book so much. I first had a copy of this in the mid-90s in Newcastle when I was a photography student. And I was a bit spellbound by it at the time. I came across it by accident and I was totally sort of transfixed into it. For some reason, I lost the book. Or maybe I give it away, I'm not really sure. I lost possession of the book. So when I was doing recently John Anguson's The English Journey and the references to Priestley, it made me remember the Worktown People book. And so I started sort of finding it, look for it, and I found a copy. And I just wanted to go through it, and it was a book I loved and I totally forgot about. And with that English Journey book by John Anguson, it really sort of sparked my interest. And I realised I'd been missing this book. So I managed to get this book, and it's from Great Yarmouth Libraries, withdrawn. And you can see here, it first went out in 1983. Just get out and buy this book. You can pick this book up for under a tenner, and it is just a must in any photography bookshelf. It is just such an amazing book. So going back to the references of John Anguson's English Journey, it all stems back to Priestley. It stems back to J.B. Priestley and his English Journey, his observations, his written diaries, his written prose about life in England in the mid-30s, and his analysis of it and its deprivation and the community spirit and the way people live their lives and leisure time. And Priestley's work sparked off the mass observation. The mass observation, which this was part of, inspired other photographers. McCullen, I presume Chris Killip, I presume Ian Berry, Homer Sykes. These guys have been documenting British life for a long time, and it's such a significant book. But also it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I want to dig into it a little bit and show you about this book and tell you a little bit about Humphrey Spender, the mass observation, and just let's go through this book because it should come with a warning. It's just so lovely. So let's run through it. It's about 128 pages. And I actually might go out and get this again and just get a copy which hasn't got all these bits on it. So let's have a look through it. Let me just try and give you some insight into it. So here is Worktown People by Humphrey Spender. Who Humphrey Spender is, the mass observation Worktown People. And it was edited by Jerry Mulford for Falling Wall Press. Contents page, acknowledgements, Susie Fleming and other people who were involved. So this is just a little introduction on the mass observation, and then a little bit about the founders. This is the introduction. And you can see somewhere along here there's been a student or something, or somebody researching it. They've underlined certain things, and so it's really insightful. You've got to get this book, right? So introduction here about the mass observation, interview with Humphrey Spender, which is really amazing, and it's all about how he viewed things, how he worked, and then the book starts. So what was the mass observation? The mass observation was founded by Charles Madge and Tom Harrison. I think Charles Madge was a journalist and Tom Harrison was an anthropologist. The whole basis of the book, now going back to Priestley's unravelling of British society, Madge and Harrison were brought together on the idea that we didn't really know anything about our culture, the working classes. So they set this group up to start documenting it with writers, painters, photographers, just anybody and everybody they could get their hands on to go out and contribute. They asked the public to contribute everything. people to sort of give parts of their daily life down. And it was an amazing sort of concept, especially in the late 30s. Humphrey was invited to photograph Bolton, and I think he was asked to document Bolton and Blackpool. And I think Blackpool, because of its relationship with the holiday side of things, and that's where people, I think, in that area went for their holidays. And so it's classed very similar, very working class areas, and where the working class worked and where the working class went to have leisure time. So between the year or so he took to shoot this, he shot over 850, 900 images. It was about 104 in this book. And I think Tom Harrison coined the phrase Worktown for Bolton because it's common association with the working class and industrial elements of the landscape. Bolton was a boom town in the 19th century. Cotton mills, bleaching and drying works. It was the centre of cotton. And Humphrey Spender quoted in just before he was starting this, he said, "The whole landscape, the townscape was severe and it made me apprehensive." So this is a really nice insight, which you've got to read if you get it. It's wonderful. Humphrey Spender, he was working for the Daily Mirror, and this is a really insightful interview to how he thinks and how he went about shooting this. And how he went about shooting this was really interesting. I think he was quite in awe of the task ahead. I think he was quite apprehensive on standing out. And I think why? Because the way the media portrayed the working class in the 30s. And I think Humphrey was very hesitant about the way he wanted to shoot this. In the way the media portrayed the sort of newspapers and portrayed the working class, there was a mistrust. There was a sort of looking down from the establishment. And the working class were portrayed very badly in a lot of ways in the press in the 30s. And I think Humphrey was conscious of that. And that was the whole point of the mass observation, to bring in the reality and the realism of life in the 30s. So he was a newspaper photographer for the Daily Mirror. He was actually a painter as well. And he not only contributed photographs to this, he did some paintings, he did some drawings, and he wrote a lot of text, which is in the archive as well. And then after this, he went on to be the picture post photographer for the Second World War, and then he moved more into textiles, and I think he was a lecturer at the Royal College of Art and a painter. So this is a little bit of insight into Worktown. This is a really nice interview by him. Look at it, it's fantastic. And then talked about the photography and its limits. And in June 1981, Humphrey Spender went back to Bolton and Blackpool with Granada television crew. I wonder if that's around that. That might be really interesting. I'll have a little dig for that. So here are the pictures. And I'm just telling you how beautiful they are. I just can't think of a way to sort of quantify a lot of these pictures. What I will tell you is that some of them were shot on a Leica, which was stolen while he was doing this. Then he went on to a Contax. I presume at the time it was the Contax 3. And he used two lenses. He used a 35mm Biogon 2.8 and a 50mm Tessar 2.8. Them were these two lenses. And he had an interesting knack of taking his pictures where people were. And he just reminds me of a man of his experience at the time. His reluctancy reminds me of students, how they're apprehensive about putting cameras in front of people's places. He used to disguise the fact that he was a photographer. He would sit in cafes and he would sit around watching people and observing and pretend to polish his camera and then take a picture while they weren't looking. So he was the reluctant photographer in this, but a very skilled practitioner. Also, you've got to remember that the film sensitivity in the 30s was nothing like the sensitivity now and what we're used to, or what we've been used to for a long time. These pictures were harder to expose then. So sometimes they were a little deep on the blacks, and I think that's a really interesting perspective of it. Look at the sort of levels on it and the planes on it. It's just stunning. So just skimming through it, there is some text. And if there is some text, I will write on it. It's sort of sectioned off in between things like work and streets and pastimes and stuff like that. you might notice some classic pictures in here. Now, most of the pictures are like that, right to left, my favourite format. So I'll give you an example there where it's like that. So what I'll do is I'll stick to the right side, and if there's a really superb shot, I'll move it over to the left shot, and there you go, that's an amazing shot. So what I'll do, I'll go back, and you can see the sort of, you can almost sort of see the different type of sensitivity within the shots, you know. It's got that, it looks old but new, it's weird, but it's just beautiful. So some things will be lost in the reproduction, because modern pre-production with these old films is quite difficult, you know. You will get it, and they're not, that you have to accept that when you're looking at something like this, but nevertheless they are just beautiful. So this is street life. It looks almost like sort of 1900s, doesn't it? So this is him just wandering around the streets of Bolton. And again, that is a shot of the May procession. There's 2 photographs. Isn't that beautiful? I've got a Yarmouth College of Art and Design there. Look at that, stunning. For me, when I look at something like that, I almost see Ian Berry in it. I see influence passed on, and it almost looks, actually it almost looks like South Africa. It's weird, it's really interesting. So there is some definition quite lost within some of the blacks, and it's very Don McCullin, isn't it? You can see a Don McCullin in this. Apparently each day Humphrey would go to the office with Charles March and Tom Harrison, and they'd decide each day, they would look at the newspapers and decide each day what they could take pictures of, and sort of themes and stuff like that. So it was very much each day there was a new idea, a new way of doing it. And it is very bleak, isn't it? Look at that. Aren't they beautiful? It almost looks like Elzig, doesn't it, by Tish Merthyr. But I spotted this book in the 90s in Newcastle, and I'm sure Tish spotted this book as well, because we were around the same place at the same time. And it's just beautiful. You can see there's a little dodge there, can't you, on the final print. You get just a little dodge of light there where it's just a bit lighter. Oh, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So Humphrey was one of the first photographers to use a rangefinder camera, whereas previously it had all been done on big plate cameras in 5.4. And that was a new... Well, the developments there for Leica and Contax they were rolling, you know. This is a sort of... end of the 30s was major development periods for the rangefinder. Humphrey was one of the first photographers to take it out and really sort of document or make a big documentary based on using a rangefinder camera. It's just, look at that. It does feel really, it feels like 100 years before, you know. And I think this was an important book at the time. And I think, you know, this was the mass observation was an incredibly important answer to what they classed as the misconceptions of the working class and the mass media. This was a way of getting the working class to answer themselves and say, you know, look, we are the backbone of this country. Isn't that stunning? This was just, I'm going to bring this down if I can a little bit more, give it time to focus. It's so beautiful. I love the way he's using natural light. I would say Humphrey really is in his element there when he's got the permission to shoot, and he's just left to his devices. He's naturally a painter as well, so he'll treat light in a very constructive way. As you can see there, that's just stunning. I don't know what that is. I presume that's marks on the actual negative. It looks like dust marks. I'm not really sure. That's lovely. A lot of this, like I said, was shot off the cuff. You've got to see this. Look at that. Stunning. I could sit and look at these pictures for hours. There were some questions raised in this context of these pictures later on about these shots where Humphrey was saying, oh, you know, I shot a lot off the cuff, and a lot of people questioned shots like this and said, well, you didn't because this was set up. And Humphrey's answer to that, and actually in that interview talking about, well, yes, I got permission to be in the house, but this particular shot wasn't set up. And it's very sad when somebody has to justify their process when all they're trying to deliver as a constructive view, to, you know, an insight into telling a story. And it does take negotiation. It does take setting up. It does take certain elements of interpreting a scene. You're always setting up as a photographer. You're always interpreting it. You're always gauging what could be coming into the frame. Where do I point the camera? Just by pointing the camera and framing it, no matter where your subjects are, you are sort of setting it up. So for me, it's not an argument unless it's obviously moving away from the truth. And for me, that's a big issue. But it's just stunning. I mean, isn't that just a beautiful shot? I can see a Bill Brandt in this. I could just see so many influences. I can see how he's influenced so many different people, or he's been part of their world at some point. And look at that. I don't know if I'll do this book justice by just sitting showing you like this. You've got to get out and buy it and just sit back with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and have a look through it, and just, it's wonderful. Look at his hair. It's not, and it's the sort of working man's hair specialist. And this guy's got like almost Art Garfunkel, isn't it? It's amazing. Apprentices strike there. And then you've got a library reading room. Oh man. Stunning. Sport. What's that there? That's sport. There you go. I think it looks like a Bolton Wanderers home game. He's after characters, he's after people, isn't he? It's not about just photographing the crowd and photographing elements. He's after characters, people who stand out. There's a guy sitting looking at him there. That shot with the baby, for me, was just one of my favourites, but there's a few other shots in here. I think that's a greyhound track. Nice use of depth of field. Classic flat man's cap. And this is Sports Day. And then we've got parks and people at leisure. They're quite deep on the blacks there, aren't they? It'd be interesting to see how it would look in a modern day imprint. I mean, this is 1982, and that's like 30 odd years ago. In fact, it's nearly 40 years ago. I'd like to see it maybe reproduced now and see what they can do with it. Isn't that beautiful? And this is a real insight into our past, isn't it? I just love this because it makes You know what it does for me? And you may agree or disagree, it's just my thoughts. What it does for me, it makes sense of everybody else who followed and the way other people are picked up on in the 80s, in the 70s, who were documenting England. And it all makes sense. It's sort of where these things originate from. And you can see the influences in other people's work and the sort of need to get out and photograph what's on your doorstep and never stop doing it, because what you photograph now, 50, 60, 70 years, will be history, important history, and make a good job of it. Yeah, we're totally saturated by mass communication and the digital world, and you are going to always get, and you now will get masses and masses of imagery, but there's ways of doing stuff. There's ways of looking at it. There's ways of taking pictures. There's crossing the borders and really making sense of what's around you rather than just taking pictures of it. And it's going on now. There's some great publishers out there. Another Place Press, they're doing some great observational work of landscape and stuff like that. We've obviously got Blue Coat Press, Fistful of Books. There's loads of little publishers, big publishers going out there and looking at British culture and seeing what it's worth, and crossing all race barriers as well. It's really important. So there's always going to be room for it. But what you do now and what you've been working on will be historical in 40 years, so don't stop doing it. This is what I just love, this shot. Oh, it's just, I could sit and stare. You just want to be part of the picture, don't you? This book's all about people's behaviour. I could stare at this picture for hours. And this shot here, let's just check that out. Some of them are a little soft for the use of his Tessa and his Bayern lens and the contacts. And I wonder if they were a little soft because of his quickness and the way he was shooting off the cuff and his apprehension. Because, or it could just be the film, you know. And the film he was using was, I think he used the Agfa Isopan and the Kodak Super X. And I was just wondering if it was his sort of off-the-cuffness where he wanted to just shoot and then walk away. I'm wondering, because them lenses are really sharp, you know. That one, you must have seen this in something. This shot's been around. Seen this in loads of different things. It looks like a Cartier-Bresson, doesn't it? It's magnificent. And look at the streets. Look at the wideness of them streets. Absolutely no cars. And that was polling day elections. Who's that same kid there? Yeah, looks like the same girl there. And then, isn't that lovely? I'll just lift this up a little bit. Again, look at that. They're almost paintings for me. They're just, I can just fit myself right into the frame. Beautiful. It made me fall in love with black and white photography, this, when I was a student. It really did. And I did at the time start looking on my own doorstep. And I did projects which were about community and stuff based on these sort of pictures and this works and stuff. Even before I knew about this work, even before I knew about other people, you know, like and going off to Magnum and stuff like that. I didn't even know really who Magnum was before I went off to Magnum to work. And it was pure fluke and chance. I knew more about this sort of work and people like Humphrey Spender at the time than I did anything else, because it was where I was from, up in the northeast. And these houses were the same houses I lived around, and it made so much sense. And what played an important part in my life at the time was the side gallery in Newcastle. And they opened the doorways to me, to the world at the time. And to be honest, they still do. Blackpool. So now we're on holiday. There's massive fascination with Blackpool, isn't there? I was going to say there's a lot of emptiness in these shots, but every time I say something like that, something contradicts it. So Blackpool, he's sort of almost voyeuristic there. He's sort of hiding away, isn't he? Oh, look at that. I see a lot of the English by Ian Berry in this. Just the deepness, the use of light, and that composition, and the way Ian looked at it. I can definitely see it. There's a sort of realness, and these sort of images remind me of Ian Berry, and it's just, I keep bringing stuff like that up, but it's all relative, you know. It's all relevant, and Don McCullin as well. Blackpool Beach. I am taking this step for woman love on a strange honeymoon. I've no idea what that's about. That's amazing, isn't it? Shot of the illuminations. Bit of a strange shot. The funeral. This was England just before we were about to go into a world war. This was a country with high industrial output, and these people were going to war soon. It's an incredible insight. You know, when you look at some of the youth here and the youngsters and how many made it back to Bolton. This bit here, street life, the work, and this is a little bit of insight into the images themselves, which is a little, I presume, an insight by Humphrey, and he did write a lot about his work. So this is a sort of written text about that, and then going by each chapter, the funeral and such like, and then I got it withdrawn, and thankfully it was withdrawn because I got a copy, and I'd like to get another copy, so I'll get a cleaner copy just so it fits in my bookshelf, and then what will enable me to do, I can keep thumbing through this. Amazing photographer, an amazing book, a real inspiration on his practices, on the way he looked at it, and actually the Mass Observation Organisation, go out and find a little bit about it, get this book. You can buy this book for under a tenner. Get on Amazon and buy it and enjoy it and learn something from it. Thank you, Humphrey. Wonderful. Thank you for the inspiration. Please subscribe to the channel. Please share. Thank you for watching, and I wish you well.